chief economist with Windermere, Matthew offers nearly 3 decades of professional experience analyzing and interpreting economic data and its impact on the real estate market. In addition to his day-to-day responsibilities at Windermere, Matthew also sits on the Washington State Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, chairs the Board of Trustees at the Washington Center for Real Estate Research at the University of Washington, and is an advisory board member at the Runstad Center for Real Estate Studies at the University of Washington, where he also lectures in real estate economics. He is also one of a select number of economists who provides their forecasts to the Philadelphia Federal Reserve. Matthew's home value forecasts are used by both Reuters and Zillow in their home price expectation surveys. Wow, he is a busy guy. Matthew is a valuable asset to our agents who rely on him to help clients stay ahead in an ever-changing market. So without further ado, please join me in giving Matthew a very warm welcome.
Doesn't it feel good? I'm sick and tired of these things. It's just funny too high. It's okay. You happy?
Okay. Yeah.
If you're happy, you're happy. Sounds a bit funny, but that's okay. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction, Marla, and welcome all of you. It's so great to be back in person again. I'm sick and tired of doing Zoom forecasts. I think I've given about 130 in the last 23 months. And it's just not the same. Especially being an economist, right? We are known for being, the dismal science is what economics is known for. And it can be very hard when I'm speaking to a monitor, trying to figure out if people are actually watching me. And as mentioned, I teach at University of Washington as well. And when they went remote, I actually stopped teaching the undergrad program. So no, I've got 400 students taking economics, whether they were actually watching me or watching TikTok. So it's great to be back in person. As Marla mentioned, I'm going to take a bit of a top-to-bottom approach, talk briefly about what's going on in the national economy, and then start distilling it down to the local market here, both regionally and, as you mentioned, here on Camano Island. I'm going to touch on inflation. It's been interesting. So far, since I arrived 20 minutes ago, more people have asked me about inflation, so I'm actually going to touch on that briefly. I'm going to geek out with you just for a couple of minutes and try and explain to you that no, we're not back in the 70s or the 1980s. Maybe one or two of you are old enough to remember that. It wasn't good, different this time around. All right, so kicking off with growth. So this is quarterly. GDP is growth. GDP is how we define economic expansion. It's the value of goods and services we sell as a country. We had a recession in 2020. Recession is defined as being 2 negative quarters of GDP growth. But what's remarkable about this is that when COVID kicked in, we saw the biggest contraction in the country in modern history. That's followed by the next quarter by the biggest expansion in modern history. So who knows what the hell's going on? But in my forecast through the course of this year, as you can see in the light blue lines, it is going to be above average, although economists like myself are starting to just taper back our expectations a little bit. Certainly for Q4, those numbers come out in about a month, and Q1 of next year. Why? Blame Omicron. And has the potential, possibly, to slow down the economic expansion and recovery that we're certainly seeing. But on an annualized basis, over 5% growth last year. That's what I'm forecasting. And about 3.5% this year. That might not sound like a lot, but the long-term average has been around 2%. So it is still significant. Why is it important? Well, 70% of our economy is consumption. It's us buying stuff. And we went through a period of time where we weren't buying stuff, other than toilet paper. I'm really still trying to get my head around that. It's kind of a bit bizarre, but it is what it is. So are we going to feel more comfortable going out spending money again? Are we going to start traveling again? I think we were, until the latest iteration above came along. And now some people are just not so certain. My feeling in terms of the pandemic in general, but also certainly the latest variant, I'm not an epidemiologist, I am an economist, but I've had to learn more about this little thing than I would ever wish to. is that we are likely in America to go in a similar direction to that we saw back in Europe, actually specifically back in the UK. We've actually seen a 20% week-on-week reduction in the number of new infection rates. We're running about a month behind. 1 million Americans got COVID 2 days ago. So it is still there, but my thought is that likely we will peak probably in January, end of January, and then it should start pulling back down. Now, that could change. My next door neighbour happens to be an epidemiologist for the Gates Foundation. See about that? Yeah, I know, she's an interesting character. But yes, there's some other things going on there. The assumption is that will there be more variants? Who knows? Is this something we're just going to have to get used to? Who knows? But are we ultimately going to get back to a new normal and start going about our business in somewhat of a normalised manner? Here's hoping, because without that, the economy certainly can't expand. On the employment standpoint, this is month-on-month employment gains. December was horrible, 199,000 jobs. It was well below consensus expectations, and in fact my forecast was for 450,000 jobs. Didn't happen. Mainly why? Well, we have an issue that there's actually more job openings in America than there are unemployed people. Go figure. There's a big disconnect between the qualifications of the people that are out of work and the job openings that are out there. So I think a lot of people are still holding back. That hopefully is going to change. And my, before we get to that part. So, has been bad. I think it's going to pick up, and the forecast is in a minute. But a good, better way to look at it, I thought, would be to create an index and compare what happened through COVID to the financial crisis of 2008. So took employment, created an index, came up like this. So the light blue line is COVID, the red one, well, it took us almost 7 years to recover all the jobs lost in 2008. We're doing a lot better. We're still down more than 3 million jobs, but it is starting to improve. I think that's going to happen as we start moving through the course of this year. And my forecast, and to explain that number to you, that 391 for Q1, that means we should have added an average of 391,000 jobs per month within that first quarter. So you basically take the number, multiply it by 1,000, and multiply it by 3. And if this is correct, then we should have recovered all the jobs lost due to COVID by this fall. At worst, it'll be the end of the year. So it is getting better, slowly but surely, but we have an issue with labour force participation rates low. People took early retirement when COVID kicked in. And a lot of these younger people out there saying they just don't know what to do. Tough life. I had to get a job. But they're not sure. And so when they get some clarity, hopefully through the course of the spring, that number hopefully will start to improve a little bit. So big picture. Variants, yeah, they're out there. Hopefully we won't see iteration after iteration of COVID-19. However, is it likely that we'll end up getting boosters every year? Same as the flu? Possibly. So it's going to take some time to get there, but that certainly is going to cloud and does cloud a lot of forecasts. Hiring is hard, and this is very specific because what happened when COVID-19 kicked in, it impacted the service sector far more than any other. And in that respect, it was basically bars, restaurants, hotels. And they were eviscerated, nailed. Everyone was laid off. Well, now these bars and restaurants are reopening again, and hotels are, and they're trying to hire these people back for no additional pay. And think about housekeepers. Like, okay, so you fired me day one, now you want to come back for no extra money, and you want me to clean rooms that I think are diseased. No, not going to happen. And because of that, you've actually seen wages in that industry sector go up by 10% already. So we're seeing significant growth. But more importantly, when it comes to housing, COVID-19 impacted the rental market far more specifically than the ownership market. I'll be honest with you, I don't know anyone that lost their jobs. I don't. Everyone's working from their dining room tables, but they're all still working. It is far more those face-to-face industries which were hit far harder than any other. But even in that respect, we're seeing wages rise in the service sector. We're also seeing professional business services wages increase as well, for a different reason. Companies want to grow. They've got to keep the good talent they've got. They want to attract good talent. You've got to pay them more. So wages are rising there, and that has definitive implications to the ownership housing market, without a doubt. And finally, inflation. In fact, across the country, we should see average wage increases somewhere between 4 and 4.5% this year. That's higher than we've seen in a very, very long time, mainly because inflation has been benign for such a long time as well. So very solid wage growth. If you are an employee and you haven't yet negotiated your contract with your boss, do it. If you're a boss, you probably hate me right about now. It is what it is. Build back better. This is important. It's, as we are all aware, a plan by the Biden administration to, amongst other things, fix our roads, fix our bridges. And that is going to be a boon if it passes. And certainly it's going to bring back a lot more of that manufacturing, of that blue-collar industries back to work again. And quite frankly, our roads are appalling, our bridges. Remember that bridge falling down? Got hit in Skagit County, and how it decimated that. I was actually giving a speech down in Clark County a couple of weeks ago. A lot of people moving to Clark County from Portland and still working in Portland. That bridge crossing the Columbia is going to fall down. It really will. So if the question is, we're not seeing on reaching across the aisle anymore, and even Senator Manchin and Senator Sienna, they are being a bit curious in terms of trying to get some of these things passed. If it happens, it will be a very, very big shot in the arm, no pun intended, to the economic recovery. Ultimately, yeah, there'll be bumps, but, oops, sorry, the last one. Right. Yeah, we will, all things being equal, be back to a, quote, new normal. Don't expect, by the way, the world is ever going to get back to 2019. It's highly unlikely that will ever happen, at least not for a very long time. But it is getting better, and by the end of this year, we should be back, in essence, where we were before the pandemic kicked in, at least from an employment standpoint. Now, I mentioned about inflation. I'm going to geek out for a couple of minutes, but bear with me, please. So, this is my forecast for inflation. So, top line inflation, we'll probably have peaked in the fourth quarter at 6.7% for the quarter. And it's going to trend down, but even as it does, and my forecast goes through the end of 2023, we're still above that 2% threshold. Now, Jerome Powell, Federal Reserve, it's mentioned, I speak a lot with the Philly Fed, he's been beaten up a lot. He's been beaten up a lot by basically using one word, transitory. Inflation is transitory. As in, wasn't supposed to happen this way, COVID came along, there are supply chain issues, blah, blah, blah. But I'd say it is still transitory, but the timeline's a bit longer. So we are still seeing the biggest issue really is coming in two respects. One, supply chain concerns, but more importantly, there's a lot of price gouging, price fixing going on. Certainly if you look at food products, there's 4 companies that control a massive component of it. Now they can say we're raising prices, but okay, I listened to their quarterly reports at the stock market. Well, you've got record profits. How does that work? It's been bad enough, actually, that the cereal boxes, the same size, smaller amount of stuff in them, but it has been a big issue. On the core inflation, which excludes food and energy, very volatile sectors, little peak in the first quarter this year, but again, trending down. But ultimately, in a couple of years, still be above that average. But here's what I think is really happening. Bit different. So, bottom line here is that we know that CPI is 7%, it was in December, core rate 5.5%. Fine. But, have you ever thought about used cars? Let's look at used cars. This is a month-over-month change in used car prices the last several months. This is the monthly change, not annual. It dropped down this summer. Yeah. So, now, what the right thing to do is to calculate the annualized growth rate that started the month before COVID kicked in, right? That just makes sense. So when you do that, even when you do that, annualized used car prices 25%. Have you ever tried buying a new car this year or last year? Good luck. There is none out there. Semiconductors, big problem. And it's included within CPI. So let's look at it this way. The year-over-year change, we know, 5.5%. But let's annualize it to the month before COVID-19 kicked in. Well, then it's 3.4. Still not good, but better. But what if you take out used cars, which account for 0.8% of CPI? What's Gardner's real inflation? Right now it's running at a bit more than 2.5%. People out there, when they see this significant inflation kick, they do think about the late 70s, early 80s. They try and say we're in the same situation. No, we are not. I mean, bottom line is, late 70s, OPEC, oil embargo was going on, massive energy crisis. In the early 1980s, same thing applied, but it was the Iranian oil crisis. But more importantly, we've got into this inflationary spiral because of wages. Why? 1 in 3 workers was a union worker back then. What's that number today? 10%. So the collective bargaining is not there to create that inflationary spiral. So we are absolutely not in the same situation we were back 30, 40 years ago. Not going to happen. It is going to get better, but hopefully as these supply chain issues start resolving themselves, which I hope they will, we will see that rate slow. So that's my geek out. We'll get back to the real stuff now. Alright, so locally, we'll start with Stanwood Camano, the labour market. Lost in 1 month, 35,000 jobs went away in COVID-19. It's really quite remarkable. Yeah, it's been up and down. What's been going on there? Well, certainly with a very significant exposure to aerospace, you know that. And don't get me wrong, Boeing is still remarkably important. As was mentioned earlier, I sit on Governor Inslee's Council of Economic Advisors, and aerospace on a dollar basis is by far our biggest sector. But it is not the be-all and end-all that it used to be. From when Boeing was founded in 1917, around the corner from my office in South Lake Union, until the early 1970s, we went where they went. Well, back in the early 80s, there's some guys playing around with computers in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who became Microsoft. So we've seen that diversification. Boeing is important, but even though we've seen a significant contraction in employment there, do I think it's something which can hit the housing market or the local economy in the same degree that it used to? I would argue probably not. And so we talk about aerospace. Now, if you look at aerospace in terms of those sharp V's, well, that was very simple what's going on there, strikes. No more, no less. But if you look at the average annual employment, just going back to 2010, and where it currently is at 30,500, that is not Boeing, it is aerospace in aggregate. And also the aerospace employment within Snohomish County. Very, very low. Are they going to come back? Well, I think ultimately we need to replace our global fleet of airplanes in the next 20 years anyway. Airbus is now not getting all the cash they used to get from the European Union. But the question now is going to be, where is it going to happen? Here, South Carolina, where they happen to enjoy leaving spanners in gas tanks. Anyway, so hopefully that won't be the case. But in essence, yes, as a company, as an industry sector, yes, they are important, but they're not. We're not necessarily going to go the way, if they start pulling back for a while longer, okay, so be it. I don't think it's going to have, we've certainly seen thus far, has not yet impacted the housing market. My forecast, again, 24,300 jobs were lost in 2020. Not like the weight, the headwind is still aerospace employment, that it still continues to contract. Lost jobs because of COVID, and then has lost a lot more from that. But I think this year we're going to see a greater increase in employment. And we're basically back to that 10-year average in essence. So Snohomish County is getting better in terms of employment. On the unemployment side, 3.7. December numbers aren't out yet. That is full employment. So it's actually a very, very impressive number, quite frankly, for the county itself. Although you've got to be careful with that. Some people live in Snohomish County, let's say, and work down in King County, although that's becoming less and less. I'll talk about that a bit later on. All right, so on the island, this is interesting. I always like to look at jobs that were lost because of COVID and the number of jobs that were recovered. Obviously, leisure and hospitality did, but it has recovered all. That's not a huge number. It's recovered all of the jobs lost during COVID. And it's really a bit of a blend. Government, well, government's been government, haven't added workers, which is no big surprise. But many sectors have recovered all of the jobs lost due to the pandemic, which is actually rather impressive. Manufacturing, again, because of Boeing partially. Transportation, utilities, not doing so well. Financial activities, information services, positive. Business services, positive. Retail, positive as well. So, smaller markets do tend to have the ability to recover a bit faster than larger metropolitan areas. I mean, King County, for example, is still down by about 76,000 jobs, actually in the metro area. So we've got a ways to go. You're doing pretty well. Recovery, 880 jobs out of 940 you lost. Yeah, full recovery basically. So jobs are still coming back even to this relatively small part of the world. Wow, anyway. I know on the unemployment side, 3.5 unemployment in November, it's still pretty impressive compared to where it was. Now you didn't see that weird peak that we saw in many other last countries, although actually 15.5% was not pretty, don't get me wrong. But I think really people want to work again, they're coming out, as you are now tonight. So as small as the economy is here, it is certainly seeing some of those improvements. On the retail side, what I would say is that if I have a concern at all, it is our bricks and mortar retail, mom and pop stores. Why? Well, those shelves they have are stocked with stuff that they borrowed money to fill those shelves. So I would say where you feel safe, where you feel comfortable, please spend your money locally. Amazon will be just fine without your money. Yeah, I know Bezos' divorce was expensive, I get that, but he can afford it. So, but it is that smaller retail which is having a hard time thus far from coming back. So that's my little plug for local retailers. All right, so that's very quickly on national, I'll go on locally on the economic front, getting better. Certainly we got hit a little bit last month or so, but the improvement is palpable. And I think our entire region will be back and certainly recovered all the jobs lost due to COVID by probably this fall. I'm talking kind of regionally, not just locally. But it's not to talk about mortgage rates, so I talk about ownership housing. Why? Well, last week, 3.45 on a 30-year fixed. That has some people going, oh my God. Yeah. So I was going back to 2018 here, right? When we knocked on 5%. Even at the 3.5% at below that, still remarkably low. Think about it this way, the average interest rate on a conventional 30-year fixed mortgage since it was founded back in 1971 is 7.5%. I'm not going to talk about those heady days of 1982, 18% plus points. Okay. So we have seen a slight move up, but keep some perspective here. It's still remarkably low. And my forecast going forward, we will see a stair step up in mortgage rates, but mortgage rates starting with a 4 handle 2023 story, not a 2022 story. And that, I think, is really quite extraordinary. And this is certainly just one economist's opinion, that over the last couple of years I've been having Zoom happy hours. You ever tried one of those? They're weird. With some friends of mine who are the chief economists of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Wells Fargo, kind of a dry group. But, and last one we had, we are all in a very, very tight range of where we think mortgage rates will be. Fannie Mae was, I think probably had a couple too many cocktails. It was down, we'll probably average about 3.3 for the year. Most pessimistic mortgage bankers, not surprising, they were saying 4%. But we are all rest of us were in a very, very tight range. Now it is going to step up, and for most of us, even some 4% end of the year, that's cheap. However, who doesn't think it's cheap? Millennials. They're like, no, where's my 2 5/8 mortgage? This is daylight robbery, this is egregious, this is a rip-off. Say, sit down, grasshopper, let me teach you some things. It is going to start moving higher, and that's okay. Artificially low for a long time, we know that, but it is still going to be remarkably cheap from an historic perspective. And we did see a big bump in the last couple of weeks. I think that's going to settle down later on in the spring. But the overall trend is, without a doubt, going to be higher. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, quite frankly. Think about how the housing market's been impacted through these artificially low interest rates, and because of that massive price growth. But there is one thing I do want to caution you about. Imagine you are, if you happen to still have a mortgage, you're sat in your home and it's 2025, and you're sat on a 2 5/8 mortgage. And mortgage rates in 2025 are, let's say, 5.5%, maybe 6%. Are you going to sell and lose that likely never to be seen again mortgage rate? Yeah. It's going to be an issue. I think it really could be an issue. Because if that's the case, if renovate or stay put, and we're not seeing that churn. We're living in our homes a lot longer now than we used to. And that's going to be a problem. If we say, no, I love my mortgage rate, why would I ever want to change it? So be a bit careful what you wish for. So rates go up, you could actually see even less turnover of housing for people that did benefit. I refinanced twice through COVID, put it that way. So rates are going to start to rise a little bit, and that will start acting as a touch of a headwind to price growth. All right, Island County. I always like looking at migration patterns. Now, this is Office of Financial Management numbers. We won't get the census numbers until August. Great, I'm going to get the data I need 2 years late. Yay! But OFM puts out some decent figures. I'll be curious about this. So, 758 kids were born in the island last year. All right, that's been trending down. Thank you, millennials. Fewer kids or no kids. More people died on the island than were born. Yeah. Again, thank you, COVID. So you take births minus deaths, we actually lost population, 122 people. However, let's look at it later. Then you look at in-migration. You're moving here from somewhere else. It is a small market, and therefore it does look quite a lot like a sine wave for a long period of time. Certainly it's been down, still positive, however. We're seeing many markets that actually it's turned negative. And a lot of what's been going on, people moving from California. California lost population last year. It's never done that before. The Western US tends to never lose population. But it has. 2 reasons: taxes and fires and climate. Now what are they doing? They're coming, they go I-5, that's why they call it the 5. Why? So they go I-5, and a few of the city ones stay in Oregon, the rest are coming up here. But they're not just here as well. There's a lot of migration plans going on from California to Salt Lake City in Utah and to Austin, Texas. You might wonder, California, liberal, right? Why are you moving to red states? Well, both Salt Lake City and Austin are dots of blue in a sea of red. They really are quite remarkable. In fact, my middle son moved from San Jose to Austin about 3 months ago. So you're seeing that moving away, and a lot of them coming up here, and they're buying houses up here. Why? We are cheap. And they're coming out of Northern California rather than Southern California. The LA Basin, people are moving actually to Riverside, California, or down south to San Diego. The north, however, they are coming up here. And I think as climate change is going to be, not going to go away, I think more and more people are going to start leaving California and coming north. And believe it or not, our weather's getting better. So they're heading our direction. All right, so this thing, now here's, I look at things a bit differently than the headline number you might read in the Times or wherever. And here's why I do it. So if you look at listings now, these numbers can be slightly different than others. The reason being is that I adjust my data for seasonality. Otherwise it's going to be doing this, right? So it will tell you that 51 listings, Island County, in December. Horrible, right? Is that real? No, it's not. Here's why. Really, it's 176. Now, why is that? New listings. It's the way it's calculated. The way you calculate inventory is the number of homes on the market on a set date of the month. Now, if a house comes on the market, let's say on the 5th of the month, and goes pending on the 10th, not surprising, quite frankly, in this market, it's not counted. So normally, if you see active listings above new, those lines crossed. So even though woefully inadequate inventory, you were still seeing transactions, a lot of them, because homes would come to the market and being sold almost immediately. And it's not picked up in the numbers that you'll be reading about in a lot of the media. But that's why, even though everyone talks about there's nothing to buy, actually not quite the case. So again, a different way to look at it. See, this is proved. I mean, woefully listings, but you have exceeded your long-term average, which by the way is 1,274 transactions per year for the last 15 years. So that's the average, but you exceeded it for the last 7 years, and you exceeded it significantly. That wouldn't be the case if there was nothing to buy, would there? But it actually is. How long do you live in your homes? On average in Island County, you live in your homes now? Yeah, only 6 years. It was up around 8 years, thank you, COVID. But it has leveled off. And so the ownership tenure, how long people prefer to stay in their homes, has been rising, but it has pulled back. And again, fairly naturally because of the pandemic. Beyond that, pricing is quite remarkable. Here's sale prices, both average as well as median, been just moving up very nicely for the last 9-10 years. And if you think about it this way, if you bought your home in 2012, it's quite likely your home value has tripled. I don't know where you can go and get that investment. Don't say crypto, please. Yes, I'm rich. Oh, no, I'm not. So, but we have really seen that that's there. But look at this massive, I'm probably going to press the wrong button. Well, hopefully we'll be. Oh, no. Yeah, look at the laser garden, that's smart. But that huge spike we saw in mid-2020, and that really was because of COVID. Because a lot of people was, one, starting to look to move further out. Certainly we're seeing that migration away from King County because of work from home. Why is work from home important? It's not going to be a black and white situation. For a vast majority of businesses, it's going to be a blend. It'll be a couple of days a week in the office, a couple of days a week at home. Given that fact, historically speaking, home prices look like a wedding cake. The closer you get to the job centres, the more expensive it becomes, because there's a value to our time. Right? Well, if I have to go in the office 2 days a week, I'll put up with a crappy commute and get more house than money. And certainly you see people move out of King County, going to Stanwood County, even markets like Mount Lake Terrace, for example, undergoing massive gentrification because of people buying up houses and renovating them. So I really think the rise to the suburbs and suburban counties is going to be a big thing going forward. And it's quite possible demand could increase. You see, most large companies were going to be making the decision on work from home back on Labour Day last year. Well, then Delta kicked in. Right? Kick the can down the road, we'll do it at Christmas. There you go, Omicron. And so they have, so I think there's still a lot of clarity, but the bottom line is, do not expect the fact we're all going to leave and go and buy homes in Yakima. Not going to happen. It really won't. But what's going to happen is we will see greater interest in the adjoining counties to King County, if that happens to be where you work. That is what we see more of. And as far as, let's say, Amazon's already said very quietly that, yeah, you can work from home, but you have to be within 1 hour of the office. So that's going to draw a line, a very funny shaped line. It's going to draw a line, a boundary around South Lake Union. My son and my daughter-in-law both work for Amazon. They were told, you don't ever have to come back to work again at the office. They were dropping a huge amount of money on rent in South Lake Union. He said, Dad, what do I do? Sell. Get out the lease, buy. And so they bought a house outside of Portland, and their mortgage payment is significantly cheaper than their rent. So there will be some people that benefit from that. A lot, it will be that blend. And when more companies give the clarity on what's going on, then I think we could see more incentive for people to say, now's my time, I want to move, I want to go somewhere else. But also, it will be the fact that maybe they've worked at their dining room tables for just too damn long. I know I did. And I think what people look for in a house has also changed. Now, the old days of having a study, the builders of the Buckens and the Bernstein and Chafee and those guys always used to build studies, and they stopped doing it because no one's ever using them. Now they are. Through COVID, I was probably did more television interviews with reporters when they were interviewing me from their cars or from their bedroom closets than anything else. Now, I'm not talking King 5, this is CNBC. It's bizarre. So people are now saying, perhaps I do need a dedicated workspace, and I don't have it in my house. If I can't add on whatever, then I'm going to look to move. And home sellers, even if they don't have an office, we are seeing them create dedicated Zoom spaces. Literally. Everybody will spot somewhere, kick the cat out, whatever, and this is my spot for remote calling. So again, what people look for in a house is also starting to change significantly. Annual year-on-year sale prices are up. Now you say, well, hang on, if any statisticians out there, how can the median be higher than the average? It actually can, statistically speaking. It means it's weighted at the higher end of the price spectrum. And that's generally speaking what happens. But, I mean, that's just that very, very, very significant increase in home prices in 2021. I mean, 2020 was good. I really thought back a year ago that we were going to start seeing a slowing down in prices. Mortgage rates pulled back down again last year. I was wrong because of that. But this is an amazing thing if you're a homeowner, certainly. But does that mean, okay, this is great, I can get all this money? Well, it depends on where, to do that, you're going to sell, but where are you going to buy? It's going to be the same price point, unless you're going to move to Yuma, Arizona or something. Which is, I always thought where everyone retires to Yuma. I thought that when I first came to America. Everyone buys an Adobe. So very, very well above that long-term average return price growth. But here's what's happened as prices are going up. This is insane. Homeowners in Island County with a mortgage, 56.5% of them have got more than 50% equity. So if any of you say that's a housing bubble, Gardner, nah, sorry. Qualifying to buy a home now is like giving blood. So very, very different environment. But you're sat on a ton of cash. I mean, remarkable. And again, because of COVID, you were hanging around that, what, 35% level? Then it went parabolic. Very, very impressive, by the way. Okay, all right. Now, talking about bubbles and what have you, let's look at it slightly differently. Again, bear with me on this. So we know in the county, home prices have done this. Again, ugly looking chart, but it is what it is. But at the same time, mortgage rates have gone the other way. So part of the reason why prices can rise so much, the mortgage rates were around 8% in 2000 and 3% a couple of months ago. So you really have to look at that correlation between the cost of borrowing funds and price appreciation. But it's not just that, we're not building enough housing. That's a big, big issue right now. We've run out of land, quite frankly. And not just because you're on the island here, but we have it in the Puget Sound. And as mentioned, I spent a lot of time with Governor Inslee, and I've been beating up about housing supply for years. Thankfully, it's now started to adopt it. I'll be spending a lot of time in Olympia in the next 2 legislative sessions trying to figure out how we can add density that's sympathetic. I don't want to build 50-story high-rises everywhere. I really don't. But other states are doing it. In fact, starting in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where you can build duplexes or triplexes inside any single-family zoned area within the city. The state of Oregon adopted it. That kicks into play this May. And Governor Newsom in California signed Senate Bills 8, 9, and 10, basically doing exactly the same thing. You can build multifamily inside single-family zoned areas. That's something which, because we know our urban growth boundaries that we have, they're not going to be expanded. Now, housing prices have gone to this degree that I do fear for the younger generation that millennials are getting older. They're telling them 9.5 million of them in America are turning 30 this year. That's the median age of a first-time buyer. Where are they going to buy? Where can they afford to buy? They're still coming to the bank of mum and dad, believe me, it happened. But it's going to be a concern. But more than that, we've spent so much time reading from Boeing onwards, living on the backs of giants of companies that happen to be here because they might have gone to school together. At what point is that going to change? At what point are companies going to say, I've got to pay people how much not to live in a shoebox? Well, then hub and spoke models, which we're starting to see already, which is you'll keep your main office, but as you expand, you'll expand further out. That can be beneficial locally. But what we are already seeing, I mentioned Boise is a great example of that. Boise home prices have doubled in 2 years. And that's fine if you're moving there, because it's still dirt cheap per se. But if you're a lot of local people there that always expected to be able to afford to buy a home, guess what? They can't now. It is a big, big concern. So part of the reason why we've seen that massive price increase is the fact that mortgage rates have come down. But let's take it a step further. The step further is this. And again, bear with me. A guy called Bob Schiller, you might know Bob Schiller from the Case Shiller Index. He wrote a book called Rational Exuberance years ago. And in the book, he said what you need to do is you need to adjust home values for inflation. Because think about it, the value of a dollar in 1990, let's say, is very different from the value of a dollar today. Right? That does make sense. So I thought, okay, Island County, here we go. So we know prices between 2000 and now went up by 228%. Yeah, huge. But adjust that for inflation, which will be CPI X shelter, because if you include the shelter component, you're double dipping. And it really is 107. So still a lot. I mean, it's still more than doubled in 20 years, but it's a lot better. And let's take it one step further and look at mortgage payments. So the average mortgage payment on an unadjusted purchase of a house, or a median home sale priced house on the island, the mortgage payment's gone up by almost 90%. But guess what? In reality, mortgage payments are only 17% higher now than they were 21 years ago, in reality. And look, it's so much cheaper now in mortgage than it was, can you tell, when the housing bubble was happening? Yeah. Right, exactly. So in reality, my job at Windermere is to make sure I engage our brokers, make sure they're the smartest ones out there, and also identify bubbles and what's happening. Now, hopefully, unlike 2006, when no one listened to me, if it happens again, they will. But I look at all these numbers all day long to try and see what what's worrying me in terms of the housing market? Are we getting to a point that we're going to see another crash that we saw in 2007, 2008? Ultimately, I'm just not seeing that here today. But affordability is an issue. At the University of Washington, we've been putting together an affordability index since 1994. Light blue line, yeah, first-time buyers. And this is the ability for a household making a median income to afford a median-priced house. But it hasn't been technically affordable for several years. The affordability constraints are coming into play, even more so now, given where we've seen prices go historically. And that is a worry, especially it's a worry for the younger generation. Look at median sale prices, again, on different spots around the island, all up. I mean, other than Langley, up at very, very impressive figures across the board. So it's not a case that other markets further south are benefiting more. Not the case. You might think that was going to be, if somebody's going to get hurt, it might be, let's say, up in Whatcom County with the border shutting down, but they even saw price. My forecast of Whatcom County for this year is about 15% growth. So, yeah, I know, Whatcom County, belly. Anyway, so, my forecast for the county, prices did rise from almost 19.5% last year. I'm figuring about 13% this year. That is, I mean, I ran the model and it came back to 13, and I think it's got to be wrong. So I went through the math, and yeah, unless something really bizarre happens, you'll see double-digit price growth again, which is still a very, very impressive number. I'm sure you'll agree. Okay, forbearance. You know about forbearance, right? The ability, COVID kicked in, it basically said you can stop paying your mortgage, but when you come out of forbearance, you've got to make the bank whole. By refinancing, extending the term of your loan. FHFA came up with a program back in April of 2020. Brilliant, brilliant program, and it has worked. So the impacts of that on our county are, you peaked out, not that high. It was actually, nationally, it was about just shy of 10%. Almost 1 in 10 homes in the country with a mortgage were in forbearance in April of 2020. Here you've got more half that. Now, this is September. I get the data from the Atlanta Fed. It's released 3 months late, so there's a lag time. I would argue today that number's going to be down close to 1%, if not slightly below 1%. So it worked. The reason why I show you this is there have been some of our brokers saying that they have clients who are saying, I'm going to wait. With everyone in forbearance, they're going to go into foreclosure. I'm going to pick up a home on the cheap. Good luck. Not going to happen. It just really won't. As a first worked well. But I mean, I thought, let's take a look at it this way. Is the share of forbearance? I just took certain select markets around here. I mean, we're not talking about a huge number of homes here. This again looks at homeowners with a mortgage in each of these markets. I mean, there's 92, well, back September, there were 92 homeowners on Camano Island who were in forbearance. But more importantly, a lot of people took forbearance and kept on paying their mortgages. They took it as a safety net, a backstop. So it's a program that certainly worked, and any implication or any suggestion is going to lead to a massive wave of foreclosures. I'm sorry, not going to happen. Just the numbers don't lie. All right, so that's Allen County. Now your neck of the woods. It's been a thing. Nothing. Fine. Again, seasonally adjusted. 15 listings, single-family homes on Camano Island in December. In reality, better. Not great, but better. But again, you can see really for the last couple of years, well, pretty much, we've seen new listings above the level of active inventory. That just tells me that churn, these homes are selling remarkably quickly. And home buyers have been out there that for a long time have been just suffering from buyer fatigue. It's like, I want to buy a house, and I'm always beaten to the punch. They're getting sick and tired of writing the groveling letters to the home seller saying, please choose me. Best letter I ever saw was not one from a would-be home buyer, from their dog. It's like, I love your yard, please sell. I'm like, I think I throw it in my throat. Really? But they are fatigued because it is such a tight market. It's a big problem because the transactional velocities have been really quite remarkable. That's not yet, that is actually annualized. So well above that long-term average, which has been about 340 units per year. So yes, you exceed it significantly so. Pricing, Median average again, knocking on $700,000. I mean, talking to Marlon and Randy earlier on, the number of listings that Windermere has here above $1 million is at all-time highs. And in fact, $1 million isn't much for a house anymore. Doesn't that make you think? It really does. But again, a lot of that is this wave of people coming up here from other parts of the country where they still think we are cheap. But it has been very frenetic, which does tend to happen in smaller markets. But year over year, both median and average, well, average was up to 20%, almost 16% on median. This is not sustainable, by the way, guys. It isn't. If mortgage rates are going up, unless you tell me that your employer is going to pay you that much more to be able to service that debt with that kind of pace of appreciation, and if he is, well done on the job you're in, because you cannot do it. It doesn't make any sense. So we've seen a very significant increase. Is it normal? No. Months of inventory, how long it would take, given based upon the number of units available in the market and number of pending sales. That number for a normalised market should be somewhere around 4, not 2 weeks. It would take 2 weeks to sell every home you've got here. That's not normal. It really isn't normal. And we know that because even in December, the average deal was made on a house in 15 days. 15 days. In December. We had snow in December, didn't we? Yeah. So really quite extraordinary. So my forecast, yes, it's 21.2 last year, 14.2 this year. Still a very, very significant figure. I'll be honest with you, I'd be happy if it was lower. I know, I work for a real estate company, I shouldn't be saying that, but I do. Because it cannot continue this way. It does put in those affordability pressure I talked about earlier on. Stanwood is another market they wanted me to mention about. Again, even next to those listings, it has been busy over in Stanwood, more so, as with many other markets in the last couple of years, inventory selling remarkably quickly. And you've been, again, wow, 450 transactions. They average less than 300 per year. So you exceeded that by 50%. That is a lot of sales happening. And pricing, still, with the average now, $750,000, it is significant, there's no doubt about it. Now, you might say, what the heck's that spike? I don't know. And it'd be kind of really expensive houses sold, which is why it hit the average and not the median. But those we sort of spike now. It's the reason why we shouldn't look at averages, quite frankly. But if you look year over year, north of 20% prices increase. Once it's sales, not list prices. But what we have found, what I've found, is we start to see a bit of softening in the list price appreciation. That for me is a leading indicator, right? Lagging indicators are what somebody's paid for a home. Leading is what somebody's asking for it. And home sellers, they've had the upper hand for a long time. I can ask whatever I want for my house and I'm going to get it. Well, you're starting to get a bit of pushback now. So you're actually seeing some softening in the pace of list price growth, something I tend to look at more than anything else. Because you're hitting on that affordability ceiling. There's only so much somebody will pay, even as tight as the market really regionally is today. And my forecast would be, months of inventory again, 2 weeks, it should be close to 4. They were balanced back in 2012. How bizarre thinking about it that long ago. So again, 2 weeks, and it sells very quickly. That bit slower in Stanwood. Almost less than 3 weeks. But still, that is not normal. Comparing where we were a year ago, even 2 years ago, it's a very, very different environment. So my forecast, 12.4 down from 21.4. So, but again, still double digits, which is, I keep on questioning the model, looking at it, and I run the math again, I look at the algorithms, and it said, no, this is right. Unless something weird happens with this mortgage rates double overnight, not going to happen. But it said, no, this is where it's going to be for right now. But affordability, believe me, that is one of the biggest things we need to be thoughtful about. Now, if you all own homes, that's great, well done. But it is that next up-and-coming generation, where and what can they afford to buy. Builders, I don't talk too much about new construction because they're really the new construction world that's not custom, it's so small. But they want to build, they're on this planet to do one thing, build homes. But the problem is, look at lumber costs. Okay. Not just lumber costs. By the way, we still have the tariff on softwood imported lumber from Canada, which was put in by the previous administration. What are the Canadians that do bad to us? So that's still there, but it's also aluminum, it's steel, it's copper. Why? Trade wars with China, and tariffs with China as well. Okay, you've got construction labour. No one's learning to become a plumber, carpenter, an electrician. No one's getting into the trades. My youngest son is 17, going to be moving off to college in a while. He is useless. I'm sorry. He's driving, God forbid. But I said, okay, Will, you need to figure out how to change a tyre. I know how to do it. Really? Show me. Give me a phone. I'll call AAA. You've got to be kidding me. But boy, he could not swing a hammer straight at the bottom of money. No one's going into the trades, which means that cost of construction goes up because of that. It's also regulatory fees. More than 20 cents of every dollar a builder costs to build a home are fees. Fees. Okay. So labour costs are high. Then let's not forget land. Land. So I was looking at a single family lot ready to build on in Bothell, up the I-405 corridor. The land, the lot, $700,000. That means the builder's got to build a home on it, he's going to have to sell that home for $2.4 million to make a margin. I like Bothell, I don't like $2 million Bothell. So that's why they want to build, but they're building ultimately to the luxury market, because that's where they can get a margin, not to where most of the demand is, which is at more affordable price points, because you're not adding on supply, but you still have population growth. That just pushes prices up. It's Econ 501. It really is. So, and that's kind of where we're stuck right now. So, on the forecast, listing tough. I don't see it's going to increase. It is going to be still a seller's market in 2022. I'm sure home buyers, sorry, keep on trying. You will find one, I promise you. But it is going to be tight. I just don't see any reason why we'll see an increase in that churn, that turnover. Now, the remote work part we've talked about, you could see some benefits there. Again, it's still uncertain as to what company policies are going to be for a lot of their workers. So not expecting to see a big influx, certainly into Island County, from remote workers. Prices, going to slow. Because we are seeing mortgage rates and affordability both act as headwinds, get it? But it's still, north of 10% anywhere this year is still remarkably impressive. So it's, all things being said, I think that the housing market has done so well. A lot of people thought that COVID-19 kicked in, it's going to decimate the ownership market. Hasn't impacted renters, the rental market, very significantly. But we've also have seen on the ownership side is investment buyers, investment properties. Because of the moratoria on evictions, they haven't got to get the rent. Now, they could get forbearance, by the way, so a lot of them into that program. But what I'm starting to hear a lot of is that tenants are not only not paying their rent, they're not paying the utilities either. And that means that utility companies, water, what have you, they're putting liens on the house. So what does that mean? That means ultimately the homeowner says, heck with this, I don't need the grief, the market's great, I can sell my home for a ton of money, I'll go do something else. Ultimately, if they do that, they do sell, that's just going to deplete the stock of rental housing. And that ultimately will push rents higher. There are still a lot of households who are renters, not owners, but they're not apartment dwellers, they want a single family home, they've got families, what have you. And it's going to be increasingly hard for them. Because I just don't see why that would change. Now, with the moratorium expiring, that we'll see how it goes. But in terms of the investment side, we haven't seen an explosion of certainly institutional investors here in our market. They tend to be going to Louisiana and various other parts because housing is so expensive here. They're obviously looking for a yield, a return on that investment. But if they've got to pay so much for the house, then if they're going to be renting it out, well, the rental, what they need to achieve in rent just doesn't make any sense. So we've seen Arkansas, Alabama, Louisiana, to parts Ohio, seeing it's still a big impact because you buy a home there for 80 grand. But that's still increasing, but far less so. In fact, here in the Puget Sound, last quarter we probably saw less than 1% of homes trade to institutional investors. So that's been far less because of how much they have to pay, and it's just not giving them the return that's needed, either for the investors or individually. The housing market this year, It's going to be tight, prices will continue to increase, there'll be more demand than there will be supply. And that's going to be great if you own a home, if you think about moving, but if you think about moving where? Are you going to go to Yuma? Who knows? But it really has been something which has been, I got 3 friends of mine writing books about housing through COVID right now that I was at grad school with. It's interesting to see how this plays out, because it did cause a significant shift in where we look to live, what we want to live in. But is owning a home still the best investment you probably ever have? Nationally, the household wealth across the country of an owner household is about $270,000. The average net wealth of a rental household, $7,000. Yeah, has it been for many, many decades a way to create wealth within the home and shelter you need to live in it? Yeah. And that will continue, but its pace of price appreciation has to slow. And it will. Trouble is, not this year. And with that, I'll be delighted if you've got any questions to address those. If you do, and if you don't, that's fine as well. I'll start drinking. Okay. Any questions? No?
Oh, yeah, question.
Sure.
At the beginning, you showed GDP.
Yeah.
Was that adjusted for inflation?
Wrong. It's a seasonally adjusted annual rate. So yes, it is adjusted for seasonality, but you don't know. No one adjusts GDP for inflation.
You show that, and then you showed inflation. Not everybody has to buy a used car. They have to buy energy, and they have to buy groceries.
Yes, you do. So that's when I concentrate on the core inflation number, which excludes food and energy. But what is interesting about that is that December PPI numbers, I'm going a bit geeky a bit, so producer price index, which is basically the amount of money paid at factory gates, the wholesalers buy. Those numbers increased by 0.2% in December. That's the lowest pace of increase in over a year. And we've seen softening also on aggregated food pricing. So I really think that you look at PPI first, because that's going to be a good indicator, because I use it in my modelling, as to what ultimately we're going to have to pay at the grocery store. But again, a lot of it has been driven, not just supply chain issues, but certainly on the food side. Yeah, General Mills. Yeah, amen.
Disposable income has something to do with whether people want to buy a house or not?
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, that's a great point. Owning a home is a massive hedge against inflation. And it always has been, because it is you're borrowing a fixed payment, right? So anytime you see inflation start to increase, then buying real estate, certainly buying a house, yeah, you're better off doing it, because it is a very, very significant hedge on inflation. I would definitely do that as buying silver. I got a friend of mine who actually did work for Boeing just to keep himself honest.